Hey folks, welcome back to World History on the Map. Today we're tackling one of the spiciest stories in European history, the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon. Yep, this is straight out of your A-level history course, but honestly it works for AP, IB, or even you just clicked in because you thought, I like bread and drama. Good news, the French Revolution has both. Here's how this series works. We use maps and mind maps as our GPS for history. Instead of getting lost in random events, we'll pin them on the map, connect the dots, and sprinkle in paintings, illustrations, and charts. The goal: untangle the historical spaghetti into something you can actually chew on. Well, here's the big timeline hack. 1799. Before 1799, that is the French Revolution. Why did it blow up? What were the plot twists? Who threw the best tantrums? After 1799, Napoleon. How did one guy go from good soldier with good hair to basically redesigning the map of Europe? But before the drama kicks off, we've got to rewind. Why did the revolution start in France of all places? Why wasn't it just another boring rebellion that fizzled out? For that, we need to peek at 18th century France. Spoiler, it was complicated. Geography first. France in the 1700s was the big boss of Western Europe, the largest country by land. Even today, it's still the heavyweight champ in the EU in size. The landscape was like a three-layer cake. Plains up north and west, a chunky plateau in the middle, and mountains flexing in the south, and yes, the Alps. You've probably heard of Mont Blanc, the highest peak in Western Europe. Basically, France came with bragging rights built in. Then we've got rivers. So many rivers. The Seine is the superstar running through Paris. And where you've got rivers, you've got fertile valleys. Fertile valleys mean bread. And bread in France, that's not just food, that's a religion. The population didn't spread out evenly. Most people clustered around the good farmland like students around free pizza. Now, France's climate, honestly, it's like a buffet where you can't decide where to put on your state. North and west, mild winters, cool summers. Nice steady rain, basically sweater weather forever. Southeast, Mediterranean vibes, hot, dry summers, wet winters. Bring your sunglasses and an umbrella. Northeast, continental climate, wild swings between hot and cold. Basically France's version of mood swings. The Alps, snow, snow, and surprise, more snow. So, depending on where you lived, life in France could feel like a beach holiday, a rainy picnic, or a survival challenge. Not exactly a recipe for national unity. By 1789, France was Europe's most populous country. Sounds impressive, right? More people, more power. Except more people also means more mouths to feed. And France's farmland was uneven. Some areas grew plenty, while others barely scraped by. So bread, the thing everyone basically lived on, was always at risk of running out. Now add a couple of terrible winters and lousy harvests, and suddenly bread prices went through the roof. Imagine waking up and your daily baguette costs triple. The people of Paris weren't just hungry, they were hangry. And trust me, you don't want to mess with a nation of hangry Parisians. To make it worse, transportation was a joke. Roads, awful. Infrastructure, basically bring your own shovel. Rivers helped, but boats were slow and risky. If food couldn't move around, local famines broke out. People were fed up, literally. And then Paris. With 600,000 people, it was France under a magnifying glass. Rich bourgeoisie showing off, artisans trying to get by, and the poor struggling to survive. Inequality was everywhere. When it comes to inequality, France was basically the world champion of unfairness. So, who was the most fed up? Well, let's talk about the French class system. It went like this. First estate, the clergy. Their day job, chatting with God. Second estate, the nobility. Their day job, chatting with money. Third estate, farmers, workers, and the rising middle class. Their day job, chatting with taxes. And here's the kicker. 97% of the population were in the third estate, carrying the tax burden, while the privileged 3% lived the good life. Can you blame people for being mad? 3% were partying, 97% were paying. Not exactly a recipe for peace. Now here's the twist. Despite all the problems at home, 18th century France was actually a superstar abroad. Why? For one thing, France and England were among the first in Europe to put together strong, centralized governments. And way back in the 9th century, France almost gobbled up half of Western Europe. Pretty bold, right? Fast forward to the early 1700s, during the reign of the Sun King Louis XIV, France was the trendsetter. Art, literature, court etiquette, you name it. France was at the top. Back then, French wasn't just a language, it was a flex. Diplomacy done in French, science written in French, high culture gotta be in French. If you didn't speak French, sorry, you couldn't even pretend to be high society. And the legacy stuck. Even today, French holds its ground. Official language of the UN, the EU, NATO, the Olympics, the WTO, basically everywhere important. It's like the runner-up to English, but with way more style. And 18th century French literature, drama, and art, everyone in Europe was copying it. France wasn't just cool, it was the regional influencer. But France's influence wasn't only about looking fabulous, it was also the brewing hub of Europe. In the 18th century, France became the ultimate destination for the Enlightenment. If you wanted to upgrade your thinking, you had to check out France. The A-listers, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, Montesquieu, all French exports. And this encyclopedia they put together, it was basically the viral knowledge app of its day. As soon as French thinkers dropped a new idea, the whole of Europe was binge reading it. And Paris? Paris was the place to be. The capital was buzzing with salons, intellectual parties where big thinkers, artists, and socialites all gathered to show off their ideas. It was basically TED Talks meets Gossip Girl. Then, just outside Paris, we've got Versailles. Picture this, Louis XIV, XV, and XVI all taking turns turning this palace into their personal stage. Versailles wasn't just a building, it was a brand. The palace symbolized power, sure, but it was also Europe's ultimate trendsetter. Architecture, fashion, art, whatever came out of Versailles, the rest of Europe rushed to copy. It was like Versailles was running the biggest influencer account in Europe. A mix of fashion blogger, art blogger, and lifestyle vlogger, except with crowns. Everyone else was just trying to keep up. So, with all this background, France's inequality, its prestige, its thinkers, its flashy palace life, we are finally ready to see why the revolution exploded in 1789. In short, here's the recipe. An old, outdated system, a financial crisis the size of a black hole, Enlightenment ideas blowing people's minds, and Louis XVI making some, let's say, questionable life choices. Alright, let's talk about the ancient regime. A fancy French term that basically means the old system that nobody liked. So, what kind of country was France trying to run back then? Well, it had loads of people, but that just meant loads of pressure on farming. If the weather was bad and the harvest failed, the whole country was basically eating dirt for dinner. Farmers were broke, city workers weren't much better off, and guess what? There weren't even factories yet to absorb the unemployed. Meanwhile, Britain was already industrializing, textile mills buzzing, jobs to spare, and the French just stuck digging in the dirt, wishing for a paycheck. France was also too diverse for its own good. Every region had its own traditions and rules. The king could make a law, sure, but out in the provinces, people just shrugged like, cute rule, bro, and went back to business as usual. In short, France was a giant, broke headache. Whoever tried to govern it was basically volunteering for constant migrants. And here's the real kicker. The taxes paid by ordinary people went straight into the pockets of nobles and the church. Picture this, peasants surviving on scraps, while priests sipped wine and nobles partied at Versailles. Yeah, not exactly a mood booster. The result? Anger piling up like a stack of unpaid bills. No outlet, no reform, no release. And when anger builds too high, it eventually just snap explodes. But we can't forget one group, the French middle class. The professionals, lawyers, doctors, bankers, and so on. They were educated, they were wealthy, but politically, zilch. No voice, no power, and they still had to pay more taxes than the nobles or clergy. So, here's the mix. Smart, rich, frustrated people with zero political clout. Guess what they became? The leaders of the revolution. These were the folks with the brains, the money, the grudges, and the organizational skills. If you were casting a movie, they were the natural main characters of the uprising. Now, let's zoom in on the church and the nobles. The Catholic Church in France wasn't just rich, it was obscenely rich. It owned about 10% of all French land and, wait for it, paid 0 taxes. Education, they ran it. Publishing, they controlled it. Imagine one group being monopoly on schools, plus media mogul, plus tax-free billionaire, all rolled into one. Not exactly fair. And corruption, plenty. The wealth gap between high-ranking clergy and ordinary priests was also massive. Archbishops lived in palaces, while parish priests often struggled to afford food. And when it came time to cough up money, guess who had to pay? Yep, the lower clergy. Basically, work gets dumped on the little guy, cash gets pocketed by the big guy. As for the nobles, the second estate, they owned around 30% of the land, barely paid taxes, and didn't have to do military service either. Sweet deal, right? But here's the twist. Even within the clergy and the nobility, there were divisions. High-ranking nobles lived in Versailles, basking in luxury. Lower-ranking nobles, they clung to their privileges, sure, but many secretly resented the big guys at the top, hogging all the influence. So, when the revolution came knocking, did the nobles and the clergy band together to resist? Nope. Instead, they squabbled, backstabbed, and undermined each other. It was like watching a team lose the match before the opponent even stepped onto the field. The revolutionaries didn't even have to swing full force. The elite had already self-destructed. And speaking of the elite, let's talk about the high-ranking nobles at Versailles. Versailles, of course, was the masterpiece of Louis XIV, the famous Sun King who ruled from 1643 to 1715. Louis XIV was basically the OG influencer. Power, prestige, and drama all in one package. He set the tone for European art, literature, fashion, and court etiquette. His army, the biggest and best equipped in Europe. He wasn't just king, he was the king. But he had one tiny problem: he loved to spend. And by spend, I mean burn through money like it was going out of style. Endless wars, check. Versailles Palace, aka the money pit, check. He drained the royal treasury so badly that France became the ultimate broke paycheck-to-paycheck state. On top of that, his absolutist rule squeezed every last coin out of the poor. So resentment kept piling up. And when Louis XIV finally passed, his successors didn't inherit just the throne. They inherited a full-blown mess. By the time Louis XVI rolled around, the monarchy was basically sitting on a ticking time bomb. Spoiler, it exploded. Fast forward to 1774. New player enters the game, Louis XVI. This guy was young, inexperienced, and totally unprepared. But did that stop him? Nope. He wanted to keep absolute power and level up into some kind of super emperor. The problem? He inherited a mountain of debt the second he sat on the throne. And then, genius move. He borrowed even more money to help the Americans fight the British. Translation: I'm broke, but hey, let's sponsor someone else's war. So, where to get money? The peasants were already squeezed dry. Tax them more and they'd riot. So, Louis turned his eyes on the nobles. And the nobles' reaction? us? Pay taxes? What kind of comedy show is this? Instant outrage. Backed into a corner, Louis had no choice but to call the Estates General, hoping for a solution. Little did he know that meeting was basically opening the door straight to revolution. So, quick recap. France's ancient regime was rotten to the core. Louis XVI inherited a nightmare, crushing debt on one side, angry citizens on the other. Now, let's check out the other big fuel tank driving change, the Enlightenment. Sure, it technically started in Britain, but by the mid-18th century, Paris was the main stage. Think of it as the intellectual Coachella of Europe. Salons buzzing with debate, writers firing off pamphlets and essays like hot takes on Twitter. And what were they saying? Down with the old system, up with shiny new ideas. Liberty, popular sovereignty, equality before the law. These ideas spread like wildfire, infectious, unstoppable. And who were the revolution's leaders? Basically, Enlightenment fanboys. They read it, they quoted it, they lived it. Let's meet some of the headliners. Montesquieu. In the spirit of laws, he pitched separation of powers, which is fancy talk for don't let one guy hog all the power, or he'll lose his mind. Voltaire, hardcore freedom of speech stan. You've probably heard his line, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. He also roasted France's legal system, calling their trials, let's just say, seriously sus. Then we've got Rousseau, equal rights superfan. He wanted Nobel titles gone, poof, erased. And his big hitter, The Social Contract, basically said the only legit government is one formed freely by the people, run according to the common will. Boom. Mic drop. On the economic side, François Quesnay blasted government trade restrictions. He pushed for free flow of goods, aka let markets breathe. So, politically, economically, socially, Enlightenment ideas were like a full-scale boss fighting against the old order. Middle-class readers ate it up, and voila! Instant revolutionary ammo. So, on one hand, Enlightenment thinkers were demolishing the monarchy's credibility. On the other hand, France was still smarting from a big L, the 7 Years' War. Britain completely dunked on them, snatching colonies, including Canada. French people looked around and thought, wait, we are supposed to be a great power? Looks more like we are Europe's punching bag. National pride in the gutter. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, along comes Louis XVI deciding to bankroll the American Revolution. Money poured out, the financial black hole grew wider and deeper. That move can be summed up in one line. America won independence, France lost its wallet. France's finances by the late 1700s, a total dumpster fire. The nobles and clergy, aka the richest people in the country, refused to pay a single coin. The royal family, well, blowing cash on luxury like there was no tomorrow. Commerce was weak, industry lacked, so the only solution, borrow, borrow, borrow. But once the creditors realized France couldn't pay, they started cranking up the interest rates. Soon the French treasury was stuck in a deadly loop. Patch one hole with more loans and watch the interest snowball out of control. Then, in 1777, France made a surprising move. They hired a very non-traditional finance minister, Jacques Necker. Who was he? Not a French noble, not even Catholic, but a Swiss middle-class banker. Basically an outsider crashing the palace party. The nobles sneered, "This guy running our finances?" Necker ended up serving 3 times as a finance minister. And, well, his policies were a mixed bag at best. He never fixed the crisis, just kept borrowing to buy time. In 1789, he even told Louis XVI to call the Estates General, an idea that basically lit the fuse of revolution. His wildest stunt, in 1781, he published a royal finance report saying, "Everything's fine, the books look great," except he just hid the actual war expenses. Sounds familiar? Yep, it was the 18th century version of corporate creative accounting. Report the good news, bury the bad. Spoiler, it didn't end well. Next up, Finance Minister Cologne in 1783 actually tried to get serious. He proposed taxing the rich. Louis thought, not a bad idea, and tossed the plan to the Assembly of Notables. Their reaction, collective meltdown. "Tax us? You must be joking." The king panicked and fired Cologne. One by one, finance ministers fell like dominoes. The fiscal crisis turned into a no-win video game. No matter who played, nobody could beat the level. Frustrated, Louis XVI made a colossal mistake. He threw some opposition leaders into the Bastille prison. Instant backfire. Protests exploded nationwide. Ordinary people were already furious about taxes. Now the king was tossing critics into jail. Rage levels doubled. By 1788, the country was flooded with pamphlets demanding just one thing: reform. To make things worse, that summer hailstorms wrecked the harvest. People were broke, starving, and now angrier than ever. With no options left, Louis dragged Necker back again. You know, the guy famous for cooking the books. Desperate times, desperate hires. This time, Necker's big idea was, "Hey, let's call the Estates General." Here's the kicker: the Estates General hadn't met since 1614. That's like resurrecting a long-forgotten app after 175 years. So, in May 1789, it opened at Versailles. The scene, pure chaos. The king wanted more money. The first and second estates, clergy and nobles, just wanted to cling to their privileges. The third estate's middle-class reps wanted sweeping reforms. And the peasants, they were like, "Forget the speeches. Just lower the price of bread already." It was total deadlock. Nobles and clergy stood firm. "Our privileges." are non-negotiable. A few realized if we don't change, we are doomed, but most refused to budge. The king, indecisive, flip-flopping, looking like the world's most confused manager. After weeks of frustration, the third estate finally snapped. They declared themselves the National Assembly. Translation: power belongs to the people now, not you, Louis. And just like that, the script of French history was rewritten. Louis panicked. He locked the meeting hall to stop them. The delegates shrugged, moved next door to a tennis court, and kept going. There they made the legendary tennis court oath. We won't disband until we've got a new constitution. It was a historic mic drop moment. Meanwhile, famine raged. People starved, and Louis kept making sketchy moves, like sending troops into Paris and Versailles. The public saw soldiers on the streets and thought, oh great, so now he's gonna crush us by force? And just like that, the people's anger hit a maximum overdrive. And then, boom, July the 14th, 1789. The people of Paris stormed the Bastille. Now, here's the funny part. The Bastille didn't actually hold many prisoners, and the weapon stash was pretty underwhelming. But that didn't matter. The Bastille stood as the ultimate symbol of royal tyranny. By taking it, the people were basically shouting at the monarchy, "We are done playing your game." That's the famous storming of the Bastille, and yep, that's why July the 14th is still celebrated as France's national holiday. After that, the entire system collapsed like a Jenga tower. The Great Fear spread across France in the summer of 1789. Peasants stopped paying taxes, noble estates were looted, and sometimes the nobles themselves got beaten up. The monarchy teetering on the edge. Meanwhile, Louis XVI couldn't make up his mind. Ministers and advisors started bailing out left and right. Palace halls half empty. The Third Estate seized the moment. In August, they passed decrees abolishing feudalism. Goodbye, old order. Then came the big one, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Article 1 hits straight to the point. Men are born free and equal in rights. Boom! Enlightenment ideals carved right into the DNA of the new political system. This declaration, still one of the most iconic achievements of the revolution. And the people weren't done. In October 1789, thousands of Parisian women literally marched from Paris to Versailles, demanding bread and justice. Imagine it, an angry crowd of hungry moms storming the royal palace. Terrifying. Louis XVI had no choice. He signed off on the August decrees and the declaration. Then, under pressure, he and his family were escorted back to Paris, basically dragged from Versailles to the Tuileries Palace. The once mighty monarch was reduced to a sort of reluctant influencer, locked down and stripped of his fan base. Royal authority gone. The pace of change was insane. France went from feudal relic to revolutionary laboratory almost overnight. Absolute monarchy gone. Nobility crumbling. Religion overhauled. They even started redesigning the calendar. But here's the catch. Tearing down the old didn't magically fix the real problems. Prices were still high, bread was still scarce, and ordinary people were still starving. Then came foreign wars. In 1792, France went to war with Austria. So now it was internal chaos plus external enemies. Adding Paris being extra radical while the rest of France grumbled. Why do Parisians get to call all the shots? And you've got a recipe for non-stop political explosions. New leaders rose, but nobody could agree on who should rule or how. France fell into a giant whirlpool of instability, what we could call epic-level political chaos mode. Check out this cartoon. On the left, nobles and clergy looking horrified. On the right, the third estate breaking free from their chains and grabbing weapons. In the background, yep, that's the prison governor. His head stuck on a pike. So yeah, symbolically, the ancient regime was done, but in reality, problems everywhere. Should the king accept reforms? Could the new assembly actually govern? The revolution had knocked down the door, but walking through it wasn't going to be easy. The assembly soon realized, wow, lawmaking and running a country is actually hard. So what did they do? They formed cliques. Political clubs popped up everywhere, basically parliament fan groups with extra drama. The most famous, the Jacobins, loud, ruthless, radical. Their slogans: execute the king, crush the nobles, smash the church. Compared to them, the Feuillants looked tame. They wanted a constitutional monarchy. The Girondins were moderately Republicans, less extreme than the Jacobins. But when the Reign of Terror hit in 1793 to 94, the Jacobins wiped out both rivals. Guillotines weren't just for enemies, they were for cleaning house. The Jacobins' poster boy was Robespierre. For a while, he ran the show at the top, but the revolution eats its own. Eventually, Robespierre and his buddies were dragged to the guillotine too. Moral of the story: if you build your power on terror, don't be surprised when the terror comes for you. What about enemies outside France? Well, the Bourbon loyalists who wanted the old dynasty back, they tried and failed repeatedly. Austria, Prussia, the Dutch, and Britain all took turns attacking, and France pushed them back again and again. At first, the French army lacked officers. Lots of nobles had fled, but the rank and file still fought like champs and quickly became one of Europe's top forces. Britain was the most stubborn foe, but with a weak land army and eyes mostly on grabbing colonies, it couldn't march the Bourbons back onto the throne. The revolutionary governments weren't just shouting slogans. They got busy dismantling the old order. Taxes, local governments, the courts, the church, reform, 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 until almost nothing of the ancient regime was left standing. But problems kept piling up. The 1790 harvest was terrible. Nobles and clergy resisted non-stop, clinging to their privileges. Censorship ended, the press went wild, and radical ideas went viral. Then the king made everything worse. In June 1791, Louis XVI and his family tried a midnight escape. They were caught at Vincennes, hauled back to Paris in disgrace, and basically turned into prisoners of the people. This wrecked the moderates' plan for a constitutional monarchy. Once the escape became public, radicals shouted, "Abolish the monarchy, and if not, try the king." Soon after, at the Champ de Mars, a peaceful petition turned into a massacre when the National Guard opened fire. Over 50 people were killed. That gunfire pushed public opinion hard to the extreme. If there was going to be a solution to the king problem, it had to be decisive. In September 1791, the National Assembly unveiled a new constitution. Sovereignty to the nation, lawmaking to a legislative assembly, and a constitutional monarchy on paper. Louis XVI hated it, but put on a polite face and said yes. There was a catch. The king still had a veto. Many legislators were furious. We wanted a republic, not a half measure where we still wait for the king's permission. Then came the oath for clergy to support the new constitution. Instant meltdown for many believers. Meanwhile, bad harvests continued, prices soared, and unrest spread. Bottom line, public confidence in the new system, well, zero. Chaos at home, pressure abroad. French patriots feared Austria and Prussia would ride in to restore the king, especially since the Austrian emperor was Queen Mary's brother. 791, the Declaration of Pillnitz had Austria and Prussia openly hinting, "We stand Louis, we don't stand your revolution." Radicals in Paris said, "Fine, let's go on the offensive. Declare war and force the king to pick a side. If he's with the nation, great. If not, bye." So, with public support and Louis doing a little nod and wink, France declared war on Austria in April 1792. Secretly, Louis hoped France would lose so he could win back power. Classic two-faced politics. As enemy armies pressed in, Paris's working poor snapped. Hunger plus fear equals explosive combo. Crowds stormed the Tuileries Palace, seized the royal family, and cut down the king's Swiss guards. This violent wave is known as the September Massacres. Some call it a second revolution, just behind the Bastille in significance. Constitutional monarchy finished. France switched to monarchy off mode and launched a new legislature, the National Convention. With the slaughter of the Swiss guards, the curtain rose on the era of terror. Under the National Convention, the revolution turned into a roller coaster. The monarchy was abolished. The first French Republic was born. Inspiring on paper, messy in practice. Louis XVI was put on trial. The verdict was predictable death. The charges were long: opposing reform, betraying the revolution, colluding with Austria, and the conclusion was blunt. Without the king's execution, the revolution cannot survive. In 1793, Louis went to the guillotine, an execution that shocked all of Europe. But his death also multiplied France's enemies. The stakes and the danger shot up. Meanwhile, the convention had to fight foreign wars while juggling money and manpower. War devoured cash. Conscription sparked riots. Grain shortages continued. Food protests were constant. And most revolutionary leaders had zero experience running a country, never mind a democracy. Result: chaos. Factions inside the convention tore at each other, radicals versus moderates, while the press poured gasoline on every fire. By early 1793, the king was dead, and the new constitution shifted executive power to the Committee of Public Safety, a small group with max authority over armies and courts. The laws got harsher, the military got tougher, and the reign of terror spread. Over 500,000 arrests, roughly 16,000 sent to the guillotine. France entered full blood-red emergency mode. Let's talk about the two heavyweights of the Committee of Public Safety, Danton and Robespierre. Danton, big mouth, but not a bad guy. He wanted the king down, sure, but he wasn't a fan of extreme terror. And what was his reward? Execution for being too soft. The man who sent him to the guillotine, none other than Robespierre. Robespierre was cold-blooded to the max. His logic went like this: if I think you might oppose me someday, off with your head today. No middle ground. Friend or foe? Nope. Just foe or future foe. Naturally, this turned Paris into a giant paranoia festival. But here's the thing. When you keep swinging the axe, eventually your colleagues start thinking, wait, I'm probably next. So the other deputies teamed up and pulled a reverse card. They overthrew Robespierre in a coup and marched him to the guillotine. His death marked the end of the terror, but it also showed that the revolution had shifted into self-destruct mode. Revolutionaries killing revolutionaries. Meanwhile, outside France, good news. The French army kept winning. Foreign threats faded. Bad news. Nature had it out for them. The 1794 harvest was terrible. Then, 1795 brought a brutal winter. Food prices shot up. Ordinary people suffered. Cue the White Terror, a wave of counter-violence where folks who'd suffered under the Jacobins now lashed out in revenge. France's politics stayed messy, brutal, unstable, and the economy still the main villain. People kept asking, can we please just have a government that stabilizes bread prices? But every new reform just created fresh chaos. Gradually, people began longing for one thing: a strong leader to restore order. Enter the Directory. In August 1795, a new constitution created a 5-man executive council. The idea was noble. Let's divide power so no one becomes a dictator again. Reality, well, let's just say noble theory, messy practice. The directors were mostly middle-class guys, the biggest winners of the revolution. They got land, they got status, they got political power. Basically, the bystanders who once ate scraps were now feasting at the table. The Directory's biggest headache was still the economy. Empty treasury, soaring military costs, rising prices, currency shortages. Plus, conscription made people furious. Faction fights never stopped. Royalists wanted a comeback. Jacobins wanted revenge. Moderates just wanted to keep things calm. In 1796, there was even a conspiracy of equals led by Babeuf, who dreamed of overthrowing the Directory. It failed and Babeuf lost his head. Ironically, the infighting meant no faction could dominate. So the Directory limped on. Thanks to tax reforms, some decent harvests, and a few military victories abroad, it staggered its way to 1799. But France's ordinary people still wanted the same thing, and the wars fixed our lives. The Directory couldn't deliver. So the public started daydreaming. Maybe, just maybe, a strong man could finally bring stability. That strong man about to walk on stage, Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1799, one bold move flipped France's destination, the coup of the 18th Brumaire. Translation: the Directory got eaten and Napoleon got seated. The revolution curtained down. The Napoleonic era curtain up. The mastermind behind the coup, Abbé Sieyès. He saw the Directory as history's worst management team and decided it had to go. But he needed muscle. And who had Paris's army under his command? A young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was no ordinary recruit. Born in Corsica, insanely ambitious, brilliant at war, sharp at politics. By 24, he was already a general. He quickly realized revolutionary mobs are unreliable. The army, that's my real power base. Back in 1795, Napoleon had already saved the Directory by blasting a Paris uprising with cannons. Overnight, he became a star. His reward: command of the army in Paris, front row seat in politics. On the battlefield, he was a rock star, crushing victories. In Austria and Italy made him France's golden boy. He was basically the national hero of the 1790s. Of course, he had his fails, like that disastrous 1798 Egyptian campaign where Britain smacked him silly, but his reputation survived. By 1799, Napoleon seized his chance. He toppled the Directory and set up the consulate. On paper, power was shared among 3 consuls. In reality, 3-man play, 1-man show. By 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French. Europe's reaction? Pure shock. Wait, isn't this just Louis XVI with better PR? Napoleon didn't care. He hated aristocratic privilege, but he also found democracy a nuisance. His philosophy: equality, sure, democracy, nah. He first made himself first consul for life, set up new ministries, founded the Bank of France, regulated bread presses, restructured local government, and built a surveillance machine that was basically secret police plus snitch hotline. The courts were reformed, mostly to crush opposition, but he kept the revolution's slogan of equality before the law. Enlightenment vibes on the surface, iron fist underneath. As for the army, Napoleon hand-picked generals loyal to him. To ordinary soldiers, he made sure pay and rations followed. Say what you will, the man knew how to manage. In 1804, at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, he staged the ultimate flex, his coronation. Here's the wild thing. The French people actually bought into Napoleon's rule. Why? Because he fixed the stuff that really mattered. The middle class cared about property rights, career opportunities, and bread prices, and Napoleon delivered on all three. At non-stop military victories, and people thought, fine, dictatorship it is, at least this guy works. One of his big reforms was the Concordat of 1801. He patched things up with the church. Clergy had to swear loyalty to the state, but other religions were free to practice. Win-win. Then came the Civil Code of 1804, aka Napoleon's masterpiece. Laws spelled out equality before the law, religious freedom, free choice of jobs, and the end of feudal leftovers. It even covered marriage, divorce, debt, and gambling. This code was so solid that it spread across Europe long after Napoleon himself was gone. But don't forget, Napoleon was no democracy angel. Well, censorship was tight. Secret police looked everywhere, and elections were a sham. Basically, Enlightenment slogans on the outside, iron fist on the inside. And what about abroad? France had been at war with its neighbors since 1792. Before 1799, it was the Revolutionary Wars. After 1803, they became the Napoleonic Wars. Why the constant fighting? Monarchs in Europe feared revolutionary ideas spreading, while French nobles begged foreign powers to please restore our king. War drained money and lives, cranked up domestic tension, and even fueled the terror. But once Napoleon took charge, war became his power game. For a whole decade, he was unstoppable. By 1812, nearly all of Europe was under French control. Only Britain, Portugal, Sweden, and Ottomans held out. To crush Britain, Napoleon rolled out the continental system. No one trades with Britain. The result? Britain kept trading anyway, and the rest of Europe got tangled in chaos. Then came 1812, Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia. Winter, starvation, supply collapse. Classic train wreck. Of the million men he marched in, fewer than 1/10 made it out. In 1813, at Leipzig, another crushing defeat. By 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate and sent to Elba. But he wasn't done. In 1815, he pulled off the famous 100 Days Comeback. It all ended at Waterloo, where Britain and Prussia tag-teamed him into the dirt. This time, there was no second chance. Napoleon was exiled to St. Helena, a lonely island in the South Atlantic, where he lived out his days. History remembers him as the most famous failed second startup founder of all time. Even though Napoleon's wars ended in disaster for France, the impact was huge. Nationalism stirred awake, liberal reforms spread faster, and in 1815, the European powers gathered at the Congress of Vienna. Basically, a giant diplomatic party to redraw the map and try to lock Europe into stability. But seeds had been planted. The revolutions of 1848, German unification, Italian unification all had roots in this Napoleonic whirlwind. And Deb, in this series, will cover those in another video. You can check it out on your own. Now, let's do a quick parliamentary recap of the French Revolution, because this is where students usually get tangled. Here's the cheat sheet. Estates General, 1789. Louis XVI needed new taxes, so he dusted off this medieval relic. The Third Estate got fed up, said, "We are out," and formed National Assembly. Hello, Tennis Court Oath, Bastille Day, Declaration of Rights, and the 1791 Constitution. This led to France briefly becoming a constitutional monarchy. Legislative Assembly, short-lived, unstable, kaput. National Convention, monarchy abolished, republic declared. Jacobins took over, Robespierre unleashed the terror, then got guillotined himself. Directory, conservatives win, weak and unstable. Then 1799, enter Napoleon, Directory dies, revolution officially ends. So yeah, revolutionary France basically swapped governments faster than people swap apps on their phone. After that came the consulate. Napoleon as first consul equals maximum power. By 1804, he ditched the pretense, crowned himself emperor, and France officially became the first empire. So the timeline goes like this. Absolute monarchy, then constitutional monarchy. First republic under the convention, then directory, then consulate, then first empire. Alright, let's lock in the key takeaways for your A-level exam. Why did the French Revolution explode? Follow the chain. Bad system, financial crisis, Enlightenment ideas, weak leadership. What made revolutionary politics so chaotic? Faction fights, hunger, war, and leaders who couldn't govern. Why did Napoleon rise and crown himself emperor? He brought stability, victories, and reforms people wanted. What were his reforms? Concordat with the church, the Napoleonic code, centralized administration, economic fixes, but always with tight control. And that, folks, is France 1774 to 1814. A drama of kings, mobs, generals, and one very ambitious Corsican. So that's what we did in this video. Used maps as the backbone with illustrations and mind map snapshots guiding you through the roller coaster from the French Revolution all the way to Napoleon's rise and crash landing. The frameworks are here. The juicy details, well, those are like Easter eggs. You have to keep digging. And if you are the kind of person who loves So that's what we did in this video. Use the maps as the backbone with illustrations and mind map snapshots guiding you through the roller coaster from the French Revolution all the way to Napoleon's rise and crash landing. The frameworks are here. The juicy details, well, those are like Easter eggs. You have to keep digging. And if you are the kind of person who loves digging, I've built a monster mind map. Nearly 3,000 branches. Yep, it's basically the family-sized pizza of study tools. Bilingual, stuffed with maps, historical images, and enough logic to make even Robespierre stop shouting. It even covers background events we didn't squeeze into this video. If you are interested, head over to the openstory WeChat public account and send the code ASO Then you may get access to the editable full mind map and the courseware documents. And by the way, I've also made complete mind maps for the British Industrial Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and German unification, all in the same bilingual, illustrated, crystal clear format. Perfect whether you just want a quick overview or you are the type to deep dive until 3 a.m. with snacks. Unlock them the same way. Alright, that's it for today. If this video was useful, don't forget to like it, save it, and share it with a friend who's also grinding through history. See you in the next one.